He chose the site for the world's largest hospital by hanging pieces of raw meat across the city, and he was the absolute first person to tell the difference between smallpox and measles. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and explore the extraordinary life of Abu Bakr al-Razi. We're talking about a man widely known in the West as Rhazes, who was famously dubbed the Galen of the Arabs. But as we're going to see, he was so much more than just a follower. He was a rebel. He was a revolutionary who took every ancient medical theory he could get his hands on and put it to the ultimate rigorous test. So why the raw meat? Just picture this bizarre scene for a second. You're walking through the bustling, sun-drenched alleys of 9th century Baghdad, and hanging from wooden posts all over the city are pieces of raw, fresh meat. Well, when Al-Razi was commissioned by the Caliph to build a massive new hospital, he didn't pick a spot based on political prestige or a nice view. He ran an empirical test. He observed that meat over several days, and he built the hospital in the exact city quarter where the meat took the absolute longest to putrefy. It's brilliant, right? He used this simple experiment to prove that area had the purest air, which he knew was step one for patient recovery. He let nature, not politicians, decide where the sick should rest.
Section 1. From Alchemist to Healer. Now, what's really wild is that his brilliant mind was focused on chemistry and music long before he ever treated a patient. Born in the Persian city of Rayy, Al-Razi was kind of a late bloomer in the medical world. He didn't even start studying the art of healing until he was nearly 40. Before that, he was a master of the lute, a skilled goldsmith, and a hardcore alchemist obsessed with unlocking the Earth's secrets. He set up an incredible laboratory, pioneered the classification of matter into solids, liquids, and gases, and even discovered sulfuric acid and ethanol. That intense background in chemical properties, it gave him a massive edge later on.
But, being an alchemist came with a really heavy price. His relentless experiments and constant exposure to toxic chemical fumes eventually caused severe damage to his eyes. Talk about irony, though. It was his desperate search for a cure for his own failing vision that pushed him to study human biology, which is exactly how he found his true calling in medicine. Section 2. Pioneering Evidence-Based Medicine. This is where he literally changes the game forever. Al-Razi essentially invented the modern clinical trial. Back then, bloodletting was the standard, unquestioned treatment for just about everything. But instead of blindly following tradition, Al-Razi wanted actual proof. When faced with patients showing early signs of meningitis, he deliberately split them into two groups. He performed bloodletting on Group A, but, and this is the revolutionary part, he intentionally left Group B entirely untouched to act as a control group. He recorded the outcomes meticulously to see if the treatment actually saved lives. Today, we call that a controlled clinical trial, and it is the absolute bedrock of modern medical research.
Section 3. The Father of Pediatrics. Up until this point in history, the medical world basically just treated children as mini adults. If an adult got a certain dose of medicine, a kid just got a smaller dose. Al-Razi realized this was fundamentally flawed. So he authored the very first medical book in history strictly dedicated to pediatrics. He understood that a developing body has entirely unique needs, and his groundbreaking work covered everything from infant nutrition and the weaning process to soothing teething pain and adjusting treatments specifically for young growing systems. And his clinical observation skills were just off the charts. Before Al-Razi, physicians constantly confused smallpox and measles. They basically just saw a rash and a fever. But Al-Razi meticulously documented the subtle differences. He noticed that smallpox hit with severe back pain and a sudden pustular rash, whereas measles brought on extreme anxiety, intense nausea, and conjunctivitis. By carefully separating these two deadly diseases for the first time in history, he created a differential diagnosis that remained the absolute gold standard in medicine for 1,000 years.
Section 4. Daring to Doubt Galen. I absolutely love this quote from him. Listen to this. "It grieves me to oppose and criticize the man Galen, from whose sea of knowledge I have drawn much. But all this reverence and appreciation will and should not prevent me from doubting, as I did, what is erroneous among his theories." You have to understand, the ancient Greek physician Galen was the undisputed authority for centuries. Questioning him was unthinkable, but Al-Razi fiercely rejected taqlid, which is the blind, uncritical adoption of beliefs based purely on authority. He demanded that sound medical practice requires independent thinking and empirical proof, no matter how famous the guy who wrote the textbook was. Section 5. Doctor of the Poor.
Now, even though he was advising caliphs, running massive hospitals, and challenging ancient giants, he never lost his deep empathy for the everyday person. He strongly believed in what he called the spiritual physic. This was the radical idea that a true doctor has to heal the soul right alongside the body. He firmly believed that utilizing philosophical therapy and genuinely managing a patient's moral and psychological state was just as critical as prescribing herbs and ointments. And his compassion was super practical too. He actually wrote a complete home medical manual titled For One Who Has No Physician. It was explicitly designed for the impoverished, for people who simply couldn't afford professional care, giving them accessible, life-saving knowledge and safe home remedies. In an era where knowledge was hoarded by the elite, Al-Razi was actively democratizing healthcare, which is something we're still fighting for today.
Section 6. A Visionary's Blind End.
After a lifetime of service, Al-Razi returned to his home city of Rayy. Those toxic fumes from his youth, combined with cataracts and severe glaucoma, finally pushed him into total blindness. The story goes that a physician approached him, offering an ointment and a surgical cure to restore his sight. But, true to his empirical nature, Al-Razi didn't just accept it. He tested the guy, asking a simple anatomical question. How many layers does the eye contain? When the supposed surgeon completely failed to answer, Al-Razi flatly refused the treatment. He said his eyes would not be touched by someone who didn't know basic anatomy. Even as the darkness closed in, he chose blindness over bad science.
He passed away in 925 CE, but man, his legacy had really just started. He left behind over 200 manuscripts that outlived him, traveling way beyond the Islamic Golden Age. By the 12th century, his texts were being translated all across Europe. By the 16th century, foundational figures of modern anatomy like Vesalius were personally editing his treatises, and his massive encyclopedia remained a core textbook in the medical faculties of major European universities well into the 18th century. I want to leave you with this final, heartbreaking but deeply powerful thought. When pressed by his peers about his blindness and why he wouldn't seek further drastic treatments, Al-Razi simply replied, "I have seen the world long enough." It's such a profound statement from a man who lost his physical sight, yet through his absolute insistence on observation, clinical trials, and independent thought, taught the entire world how to see with the eyes of reason. What modern dogmas are we currently accepting blindly that a mind like Al-Razi's would challenge today? Think about that for a second. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning everything.